The lawyer cleared his throat before speaking, as if the words he was about to read carried more weight than the paper in his hands. And to my beloved son Daniel, I leave the family home, the savings, and all remaining assets. The sentence landed softly in the room, but inside me, it hit like something collapsing. I waited for the next line. There had to be more. There had to be something that acknowledged the years I had spent caring for them. Surely he hadn't finished. Surely my name was coming next. I had bathed my mother when she forgot how to stand on her own. I had fed my father when Parkinson's made his hands too unsteady to hold a spoon. I had sold my car to help cover his surgery when insurance fell short. For 10 years, I had reorganized my entire life around theirs. And Daniel hadn't visited in 3 years. The lawyer continued reading. Then he stopped. And in that silence, I understood something before he even closed the folder. There was nothing for me. Not a dollar. Not a share of the house. Not even a line that suggested I had mattered in the final decision. I looked across the room at my brother. He sat there calmly, hands folded, his expression composed in a way that felt practiced. And in that moment, I realized something that would take me months to fully understand. This wasn't an oversight. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. Chapter 1: The One Who Stayed. In most families, love is something you can hear. It's spoken out loud, celebrated openly. But in mine, love was quiet. And over time, it began to look less like affection and more like responsibility. My name is Emily Carter, and for 10 years, I was the one who stayed. I was the one who moved back home when my mother's memory began to slip, the one who adjusted her work schedule when doctor appointments became frequent, the one who learned how to navigate insurance calls, medication lists, and emergency contacts. Daniel, my older brother, was the one who left. He moved to New York right after college with a plan and a future that didn't include coming back. He built a career, a network, a life that moved forward. He called occasionally, sent birthday messages, visited during holidays when his schedule allowed. And somehow, that was enough. Because Daniel had always been the golden child, the one our parents spoke about with pride, the one who represented possibility. I was dependable, and dependable daughters are rarely admired. They are relied on. It started with my mother. At first, the changes were small. She misplaced things, forgot appointments, repeated stories she had told just hours before. Then, one evening, she asked me where her mother was. Her mother had died decades earlier. That was when the doctors confirmed what I already suspected: early-stage Alzheimer's. Daniel sent flowers when she was diagnosed. I moved back home. 2 years later, my father was diagnosed with Parkinson's. The tremors came slowly at first, then more frequently, until simple tasks became difficult, and eventually, impossible. Soon, my mother couldn't remember him, and my father couldn't hold her hand steady enough to remind her who he was. So I became the one who remembered, the one who organized, the one who stayed. My days settled into a routine built around their needs: morning medications, doctor visits, meal preparation, physical therapy schedules, insurance claims, late-night emergencies. I stopped dating, stopped traveling, stopped imagining a future that wasn't tied to this house. Daniel called from airports and office lobbies. "You're amazing for doing this," he would say. And he meant it. But admiration from a distance doesn't share the weight of responsibility. Sometimes my father would squeeze my hand and whisper that I was their angel. On good days, my mother would smile and tell me how lucky they were to have me, and those words became the closest thing to compensation I ever received. There was no talk of inheritance, no discussions of fairness, only gratitude, and the quiet assumption that I would continue. Years passed. My mother stopped speaking. My father stopped walking, and the house slowly transformed into something that felt less like a home and more like a place of care. Meanwhile, Daniel's life continued to expand. Promotions, a Manhattan condo, an engagement to someone I had only met through a screen. The night my father died, I was the only one there. His voice was barely a whisper when he thanked me for staying. 3 days later, my mother followed. She never fully understood he was gone. Perhaps that was a kindness. I handled everything: the arrangements, the paperwork, the aftermath. Daniel flew in for the services and delivered a moving eulogy. People cried. They saw a grieving son. I was simply the tired daughter who had been there all along. A week later, we sat in the lawyer's office. And that was the moment everything changed. Chapter 2: The Reading of the Will. Grief has a way of dulling everything. By the time Daniel and I sat across from the lawyer, I no longer felt the sharp edge of loss. What remained was exhaustion, the kind that comes from years of carrying something heavy without realizing how much it weighs. The office was quiet and orderly, filled with the kind of calm that comes from distance. For the lawyer, this was routine. For us, it was the closing of a life chapter. Daniel sat beside me, composed and well-dressed. He looked like someone attending an obligation rather than standing at the end of something. I wore the same cardigan I had thrown on that morning. It still carried the faint scent of antiseptic from the house. Mr. Whitman opened the folder in front of him. This is the last will and testament of Robert and Margaret Carter. A joint will. I hadn't known that. He began reading through the formal language: debts, expenses, charitable donations. My mind drifted as the legal phrases passed by. I thought about the years behind us, the routines, the quiet sacrifices that never made it into documents. Then came the personal section. And to our beloved daughter, Emily. My attention sharpened instantly. We leave our deepest gratitude for her devotion and love. The words were gentle, but incomplete. The lawyer continued. And to our beloved son, Daniel Carter. Daniel shifted slightly beside me. We leave the family home located at 47 Willow Creek Drive. My breath caught. Along with all financial accounts, investments, and remaining assets. The sentence ended, and the room felt smaller. I waited, expecting clarification. A shared clause. Something that acknowledged the years I had spent inside that house. But none came. Mr. Whitman closed the folder. That concludes the will. I stared at him. That's everything? He nodded gently. Daniel avoided my eyes. There must be some mistake, I said quietly. I lived there. The words came out before I could stop them. Daniel finally spoke. They talked about this before. Years ago, while I was still learning how to measure medications and manage appointments. And you didn't tell me? It wasn't my place. Perhaps not. But it had been his place to accept it. Mr. Whitman slid an envelope toward us. There is also a letter. I opened it. My mother's handwriting filled the page. Steady. Familiar. From before the illness. Emily and Daniel, if you're reading this, we are gone. Emily, thank you for everything you've done for us. Daniel, we trust you to carry forward what we built. We believe this arrangement is fair. Daniel will carry on the family legacy. Emily already received what matters most: our love and time. Love and time. That was my inheritance. The lawyer began discussing the transfer process. 30 days before ownership changed. 30 days before I would leave the house I had lived in for a decade. When we left the office, I felt less like a daughter and more like someone who had completed a job. Chapter 3. The letter I wasn't supposed to see. Returning home felt different that afternoon. The rooms were the same, but the meaning behind them had shifted. I walked through the hallway slowly, noticing details I had long ignored. The marks on the walls, the worn edges of furniture, the quiet evidence of years spent caring. The study remained untouched. My father's desk was exactly as he had left it. Papers aligned neatly, pens placed carefully, a preference for order that had outlived his ability to maintain it. I opened the bottom drawer while searching for old insurance documents. That was when I saw it. A plain envelope, unaddressed, except for one word. Emily. I recognized my father's handwriting immediately. It hadn't been mentioned at the lawyer's office, and it hadn't been included with the will. I hesitated before opening it, because part of me sensed that whatever was inside would change how I saw everything. But curiosity and perhaps something deeper made the decision for me. Emily, if you are reading this, then I didn't find the right moment to speak to you directly. And it likely means your mother had the final say. The words were simple, but they carried weight. You have carried more than any child should. And I am sorry. I wanted things to be different. But your mother was afraid. Afraid of what would happen to Daniel if he didn't have security. She believed you would always be strong enough to stand on your own. I read the lines again. Because suddenly, this wasn't neglect. It was intention. I fought her on this more than once. But in the end, I chose peace over fairness. And that is my greatest regret. I sat down slowly. The letter continued. Years ago, I created a separate account, one your mother never knew about. Not out of secrecy, but out of balance. Inside the safety deposit box at First National Bank, there is something for you. The letter ended there. No explanation. No details. Just the suggestion that the story I thought had ended was still unfolding. For the first time since the will was read, I felt something different. Not anger. Not grief. Possibility. Chapter 4. The Bank Box. I didn't sleep much that night. The letter sat on the kitchen table long after I had finished reading it, as if its presence alone demanded attention. Every time I closed my eyes, one sentence repeated in my mind. I chose peace over fairness. Morning arrived quietly. By 9 o'clock, I was standing outside First National Bank, the same bank my parents had trusted for decades, the same place where birthdays had once meant small deposits and future plans. The building felt unchanged, clean, predictable, indifferent. Inside, people moved through routines that had nothing to do with inheritance or regret. I approached the front desk. I need to access a safety deposit box. The receptionist asked for identification and documentation. When I showed her the letter and explained the authorization, her expression shifted slightly. Professional curiosity replaced routine politeness. A few minutes later, I was seated across from a branch manager. He reviewed the records carefully before speaking. The box is registered under your father's name, he explained. But you are listed as a secondary authorized party. My father had planned this. Quietly, without ceremony, the manager led me down a hallway into a private room. He placed a long metal box on the table and stepped back. I'll give you some time. When the door closed, the silence felt heavier than expected. For a moment, I simply looked at the box, because whatever was inside had been meant for me alone. The lock opened easily. Inside were 3 items: a sealed envelope, a USB drive, and a leather folder. I reached for the envelope first. My name appeared again in my father's careful handwriting. Emily, if you've found this, then you've already read the letter. And it means I wasn't able to resolve things while I was alive. Inside this folder are documents for an account created in your name. Not Daniel's, not your mother's, yours. I opened the leather folder slowly. Bank statements, ownership records, legal confirmations, all bearing my name. The number at the bottom of the summary page was larger than I expected. Over time, he had built something substantial. He had done it gradually, through bonuses, investments, quiet transfers, not to deceive, but to protect. The letter continued. You sacrificed years for us. This was never meant to replace that. Nothing could. But it was meant to ensure you would not walk away with nothing. I sat back, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't gratitude. This was acknowledgement. But my attention shifted quickly to the USB drive beside it, because money answered one question. It did not answer all of them. My father had chosen to leave evidence, and evidence suggests unfinished truths. I held the drive in my hand for a moment, understanding that whatever was stored on it had never been meant for public reading. It was meant for clarity. And clarity can change everything. Chapter 5. What was on the drive? I didn't open the USB drive at the bank. Some instincts are subtle. Others arrive with quiet certainty. This one told me to wait. I placed it carefully into my bag and drove home in silence. The envelope and the folder had already shifted my understanding of the past, but the drive felt different, more deliberate, more revealing. Back in the house, I sat at the kitchen table, the same place where I had spent years organizing medications and schedules. I plugged the drive into my laptop. 3 files appeared, each labeled only with a date. The first was from 6 years earlier. It opened to a video recording. My father sat in his study, speaking directly to the camera. He looked stronger than I remembered in his final years. If you're watching this, Emily, he began, then there are things you deserve to understand. He paused before continuing. Daniel didn't just move away. The sentence lingered. He asked for help. The second file was a spreadsheet. Transfers, wires, checks. Over several years, the amounts were consistent and significant. The timeline told a quiet story. Financial support had been ongoing, repeated, intentional. The third file was another video. This one recorded later. My father looked more tired, more conflicted. Your mother believed Daniel needed support to build his future, he said. But I began to see a pattern. The screen shifted to archived emails, messages between him and Daniel, requests for assistance, reassurances that things would improve, promises that it would only be temporary. One message stood out. Emily doesn't need to know about this. I stared at the words longer than necessary, because they reframed years I had lived through. The video resumed. I realized something too late, my father continued. Daniel wasn't failing. He was being protected. He looked directly into the camera. And you were carrying the consequences. The explanation was calm, measured, without accusation. The will, he said quietly, was your mother's final attempt to make sure Daniel would always feel secure. The video ended there. I sat in silence, not because the information was shocking, but because it clarified what had once felt confusing. The imbalance had not been accidental. It had been built over time. And now, for the first time, I understood the full story behind the decision that had seemed so sudden. Truth has a way of rearranging memory. What once felt like personal loss now looked like the continuation of a long-standing pattern. And understanding that pattern changed how I saw everything that followed. Chapter 6. The Confrontation. I didn't contact Daniel immediately. Information needs time to settle before it becomes action. For years, I had moved through life reacting to urgency, medical emergencies, appointments, responsibilities that couldn't wait. Now, for the first time, I had the space to think. The files on the drive didn't make me angry. Not in the way I expected. They made things clear. Daniel hadn't simply been absent. He had been supported. Quietly. Repeatedly. And while that support was being given, I had been carrying everything else. The next morning, I sent him a message. "We need to talk." He agreed quickly. We chose a cafe halfway between the house and his hotel. Neutral ground. A place where neither of us held history. Daniel arrived before I did. He stood when I approached, as if unsure whether this meeting required formality or familiarity. We sat. No small talk. "I found something in Dad's study," I said. His expression changed not dramatically, but enough to notice. "A letter," I continued, "and a safety deposit box." He leaned back slightly, waiting. "I also found files." The pause that followed was telling. "I know about the financial support," I said. Daniel didn't deny it. "I wondered if he had explained," he replied, carefully. "He didn't," I said. He documented. I placed my phone on the table and showed him the spreadsheet. Dates. Transfers. Amounts. He looked at it briefly, before shifting his gaze away. "I wasn't trying to hide anything from you," he said. "But you didn't tell me either. That wasn't my decision to make." Perhaps not. But acceptance had been. "I sold my car to help with Dad's treatment," I said. The statement wasn't an accusation. Just context. Daniel listened. Quietly. "I never asked you to do that," he said. "No," I agreed. "You didn't." And that was the difference. Requests had been made of them. Expectations had been placed on me. He was silent for a moment, then spoke again. "I didn't realize how much this affected you. Understanding often arrives late." "I thought you were choosing to stay," he admitted. Maybe I had. At the beginning. Out of love. Out of obligation. Out of the belief that it was temporary. But choice becomes something else when it's never shared. "I'm not here to argue," I said. "I just needed to know if you understood." Daniel considered that. I do now. And for the first time since the will was read, I believed him. Understanding, however, doesn't automatically change outcomes. But it creates the possibility. Chapter 7. The Offer. After that conversation, nothing changed immediately. And yet, something had shifted. Understanding doesn't arrive with resolution. It arrives with responsibility. For years, our roles had been clear. Daniel moved forward. I stayed behind. Now, for the first time, those roles were being questioned. A few days passed before he reached out again. This time, his message was longer. He wanted to meet. We sat down in the same cafe. But the tone was different. Less guarded. More deliberate. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I didn't see it before. There was no defensiveness in his voice. Just recognition. I thought you were managing because you wanted to, he said. I didn't realize how much was expected of you. Expectations often go unnoticed by the people who don't have to carry them. I've also reviewed the will again, he continued, and everything that came with it. I listened without interruption. I don't think the outcome reflects what actually happened over the years. That was the closest he had come to saying it directly. So, he added, I'd like to make a change. I waited. I want to divide what was left to me. He spoke calmly, without performance. The house, the accounts. Not out of obligation. Not because anyone demanded it. But because he now saw the imbalance. I can't undo the past, he said. But I don't want the future to be built on it. The offer wasn't dramatic. There was no apology wrapped inside it. Just a decision. I'll arrange the legal adjustments, he continued. Half ownership of the property, and an equal division of what remains. I didn't respond immediately, because fairness, when it arrives late, requires reflection. You don't have to do that, I said. I know, he replied, and that was what mattered. The gesture wasn't about obligation. It was about acknowledgement. For years I had carried the visible responsibilities. Now, he was choosing to share the outcome. I'm not asking for anything in return, he added. Fairness doesn't erase the past, but it changes what comes next. Chapter 8: What We Really Inherited. The paperwork wasn't completed that day. Fairness doesn't arrive instantly. It takes time to translate understanding into action. Over the following weeks, Daniel followed through on what he had proposed. Ownership was adjusted. Accounts were divided. The outcome began to reflect something closer to balance. But by then, something inside me had already changed. Because the truth was, I no longer wanted the house. The place that had once been home had gradually become something else. A space filled with routines, responsibilities, memories shaped more by care than by comfort. Selling it felt less like a loss, and more like a release. The day we emptied the final room, the house felt unfamiliar. Not because anything had changed physically, but because the weight it carried was no longer ours. Sunlight moved through the empty space. Without hospital equipment, without medication trays, without the quiet hum of machines. Just stillness. Daniel stood beside me. Not as the brother who had left, and not as the one who had inherited, but simply as someone willing to see things differently. I'm sorry, he said. It wasn't dramatic, and it didn't attempt to undo the past. But it was sincere. We sold the property and divided the proceeds. Combined with what my father had quietly set aside, it gave me something I hadn't experienced in years. Freedom. Freedom to decide what came next. To build a life that wasn't shaped entirely by responsibility. Months later, Daniel and I met again. Not because we needed to resolve anything, but because we wanted to reconnect. We spoke about ordinary things. Work. Future plans. Possibilities. For the first time in years, our parents weren't at the center of the conversation. They loved us in the ways they understood. Daniel said at one point. I nodded. Because love isn't always fair. Sometimes it protects one child and relies on another. What we inherited wasn't only money or property, it was perspective, the chance to recognize imbalance, and to respond differently. I don't want us to repeat this, he said. Neither did I. So, we made a quiet agreement. Not about assets, but about awareness. That if life ever placed us in similar positions, we would see each other fully, because the real inheritance wasn't written in the will or stored in the bank. It was the opportunity to repair what had once gone unquestioned. And this time, we chose differently.